Hey, it's Matt, and today I'm going to teach you how to make your own glass aquarium lid. A glass lid will stop any fish from jumping out, will help reduce the amount of evaporation you get, and will also still let a lot of light through. Making your own glass lid can also save you a ton of money. I always buy a glass sheet from my hardware store for about 13 bucks. The sheet dimension's usually 36 by 12. If you try to buy a name brand glass lid for the same size, or even just half the size, it's about 3 times the price, around $36. And one 36 by 12 sheet usually covers a ton of nano tanks. So if you have a ton of tanks like I do, you could end up saving a ton of money, or just put that money into getting more tanks. So the things you'll need for this project is some glass. You'll need a good ruler, a Sharpie. You might need some poster tack or double-sided tape, but it's not necessary. You also need a glass cutter. You can get this at any hardware store or online. And remember, you want to fill your glass cutter up with the oil it usually comes with. I like to use some glass you can get from the hardware store because I know it cuts well and it's really clear. Some people like to use glass from picture frames or shadow boxes, and I feel like there's a 50-50 shot if that glass will cut well. Sometimes the picture frame glass can also be too thin to use. The last thing you want is glass breaking on top of your aquarium and then having to pick glass out of your tank. The first thing you want to do is measure your tank dimensions. You just want to measure out the total space at the top of the tank and then mark that down on your ruler. Once that's all marked out, you want to subtract the thickness of your tank lid holders. I'm using 3D printed ones, but you can buy some online. You also want to give yourself some wiggle room, so I always take out 2 millimeters from the total. It's also a good idea to leave extra room for any filter tubes, heater wires, or anything that's going to stick out of your tank. For the cube tank I'm using, I only have a bubbler, so I'll take the total inner diameter out from there. If you want a little more wiggle room, you could subtract a little more than 2 millimeters. But I've been doing this a while, so I'm comfortable doing that. And I just use a Sharpie to mark my ruler. And for this tank, the inside length and width is about 19 centimeters. And I've already subtracted the width of the lid holders from front to back and left to right. So that's about 2 millimeters there. And then I gave myself some wiggle room, so subtracted 2 more millimeters. And the arrow I drew is where I want to be cutting. And because we have that bubbler in the back, it takes up some room. So the lid from front to back will actually be shorter than it is from left to right. And referring to the arrows will make sure that we don't make any measuring mistakes. It's really hard to cut small pieces of glass, so we want to make sure our measuring is perfect. And when we're using a large sheet of glass, we're going to utilize the pre-cut edges. That way we only need to make 2 cuts instead of 4 cuts. We're going to make 2 small dots in either direction to make a straight line. And when you're measuring, you want to take your time and really make sure that the edge of the ruler matches the edge of the glass. Once we've made our first line, it's a good idea to scribble off the measurement you've already done. That way we don't make the same measurement twice. Then we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. And a good tip for marking the line is that you don't want to put the ruler edge right on top of the dot. You actually want to put it right next to it. That way when you draw the line, it'll actually be on the dot instead of to the side of the dot. If you're having trouble holding your ruler on the line, you can always use some poster tack to help you out. Some double-sided tape works as well, but poster tack's way easier to take off the glass when you're done. And after we double check our measurements, we're ready to start cutting. And now that we're ready to start cutting, we want to keep in mind that the glass cutter isn't super thin. There's a little bit of gap on either side of where the cutting end of the glass cutter is. We want to keep this in mind to line up the ruler when we do the cut. So there will actually be a little bit of a gap between the ruler and the line when we do our cut. And that gap is just the thickness of the glass cutter. You can see the glass cutting edge is actually on the line instead of the edge of the glass cutter being on the line. If you don't do this step, your cut will end up being either 2.5 millimeters too thick or too short. Once again, you can use double-sided tape or sticky tack to make sure that the ruler stays in place. You really want to make sure the ruler doesn't move while you do the cut. Before you cut the glass, make sure you triple check the measurements. I like to start off the glass and then roll it onto the glass as I pull over instead of right at the edge. I find that the glass cuts cleanly at the edge if I do that. And you only want to score the glass one time. You don't want to go over it more than one time. That'll make sure the glass breaks evenly. It'll also make sure your glass cutter won't dull. And it'll also help reduce the amount of shards of glass you get after you snap the glass. And you want to make sure you're pressing down on the glass cutter. You actually want a good amount of force, not too much to crack the glass, but enough to score it. There should be a noise as you cut the glass. It sounds similar to when you unroll some packing tape. If you don't hear that noise, that means you're not pressing down hard enough. And you also want to make sure you go all the way through the piece of glass. We're not going to stop at the line here. If you try to stop at the line, you'll probably miss it. And when you try to snap the glass, it'll probably crack in a weird spot. In a lot of cases, you'll end up with a small piece of glass you're not going to use. And you know, we call it cutting, but we're actually just scoring the glass so that we can break it along that line. And once that's done, we're ready to break the glass along the line. I found the best thing to do is use a table edge or a book edge or any thick straight edge you have lying around. We are cutting glass here, so there will be tiny glass shards no matter what you do. So I always like to do this in my garage so I can shop vac it later. Just make sure you be careful because these small pieces that fall off are really hard to see once we break the glass. I also like to place a hard straight edge on top of the glass, pretty much just sandwiching in the part we're not going to be using. That gives the glass a good line to follow, and always leave just a little bit of overhang on the scoring line and the edge of the board I'm using. For the video, I actually used 2 pieces of glass. The first one I used was a picture frame glass, and it was that 50-50 shot of it working or not. As you can see here, it didn't break along the scored line I made. If this is the first cut, sometimes it can happen on that extra part of glass I was talking about earlier, so it's actually not too big of a deal. But I think this is a good example of why I like to use the hardware glass. And once this happened, I just switched to the hardware store glass. And when you break the glass, it should actually break pretty easily. If you find yourself putting a lot of force onto the glass, that means you didn't put a good score line in, or the glass is probably not going to break where you want it to. If the glass isn't breaking, you kind of have 2 options. You can go over the score line again, which isn't recommended, but I've had that work before. Or you can just measure out another section of the glass and then cut that part. After we do one side, we'll do the other side. And once you have the glass cut, you can bring it to your sink and just grab a little bit of sandpaper and sand off the edges. You'll notice the edges we cut are pretty sharp, and sanding down the edges will just smooth them out. And once you're done, you can put it onto your tank. Now, I made this video for tank lids, but you can do the same exact thing if you want to make your own aquarium. If you're going to make your own tank, don't use any picture frame glass or shadow box glass. That glass is just too thin to hold water. You might be able to make a polydarium or terrarium out of that glass since there's less water, but I wouldn't recommend using that glass for an aquarium. The glass from the hardware store seems to be just the right thickness to make any nano tank you want. I recommend keeping it under 5 gallons though. And if you know you're going to have a lot of hardscape leaning onto the glass, I recommend just buying a tank, because even the glass from the hardware store might be too thin to handle any pressure from any rocks or branches you have leaning onto the glass. If you want to see how I made a tank out of the glass I cut using the same method, you can check that out on my channel. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe. That really helps me out. If you have any questions, let me know down below. Thanks for watching. Keep scaping. Bye now. Once that's done, we're ready to break. And once that's done, we're ready to break the blah blah blah.